what the fans have to keep in mind, and I hate to say this because I don't want to sound like I'm attacking the fans. I love the fans. I'm a fan myself of many of these franchises, but we're making this shit up.
Writing can be really freaking hard. And I feel like sometimes those of us who like writing make it even harder for ourselves. I've discussed this with dozens of clients, but we so often become inspired by the very pinnacle of fiction. I know some of my idols are Tarantino for dialogue, George R. Martin for world building, Monty Oum for fight scenes, DiMartino and Konietzko for magic systems, Christopher Nolan for storytelling drama, and Tite Kubo for sheer storytelling creativity. And I know you have your own idols as well. But the trap that so often occurs, coupled with our inspiration, is that we take these world-class level stories created by these titans of the industry and we make them our baseline. We say, I want to make the next Game of Thrones. I want to make the next Attack on Titan. But that inspiration we have can start to be a big problem, because if our baseline is the best, that kind of means we have to be the best too. And I tell my writing clients this all the time. We're just guys. If we could write like Shakespeare already, we would be published. But we're just guys, and that's okay. But another thing that happens is that when my clients struggle, they take it personally. They hear things from their idols about process, about planning, and all the moving parts that go into a story, and they then think they have to emulate that. A great example of this is Zach Kreger, director of the horror sensation Weapons, talking about his process.
I'm a psycho prepper, right? I mean, I storyboard and photoboard every shot of the movie weeks before we start.
And that makes sense for Zach Kreger making a movie like Weapons. Not only is he in charge of making good use of $38 million, probably more money than any of us will ever see in our lifetimes, Weapons is also just a plain super difficult story to tell. It's a horror investigative mystery film told non-chronologically across multiple different perspectives that blends a multitude of genres. He probably needed to plan out everything that he's doing to accomplish making such a unique, insanely creative film. But just because Zach Kreger does something doesn't mean that you have to do that same thing as good as he does or even the same way. I coached countless writers with big dreams of making it in the industry who talk about how they need to keep to schedule, keep to their outline, go in with everything figured out. A massive conversation over the last few years has been being a planner versus a pancer. There are writers who advocate for the pancer position, which is kind of just making things up as you go along. And then there are the planners, which have huge sections of their narrative, if not the whole thing, planned out before they ever put pen to paper. And this is how I know I'm getting old, because the terms that I was used to having in this conversation were architect versus gardener. And here's who I got it from.
Well, I have always said that I believe there are two types of writers, which I call the architect and the gardener. The architect plans everything in advance. He draws up his blueprint. He knows where the plumbing is going to run. He knows how many rooms there are going to be, exactly what the square footage of each room is. The gardener, he may know the general shape of the garden that he wants, but still, he's digging a hole in the ground, he's planting a seed.
A lot of my clients and the novice writers that I talk to force themselves into the category that their idols inhabit, mainly because they love their works and want to produce something as good, if not better. They are amazed by the insane planning of Isayama to foreshadow years in advance, or the meticulous planning out of Aaron Sorkin and his labyrinthine narratives. They see these stories and bend over backwards to plan their narratives and adhere to certain ways of doing things in them. It'll be months and months, if not years, of setting up everything and doing the world building and figuring out how many midichlorians need to be in a Horcrux before you can transmute it into the Elden Ring. They'll have mountains of storytelling material with no story. But I always have one piece of advice for them. That's not how your idols do it.
I know for some writers, they do the world building before they even write the story, but certainly not me.
One of the most freeing things as a young writer is learning that all of your favorite authors, even the ones that seem 18 steps ahead of their readers at all times, yeah, they're just making crap up as they go along, dude. Just a bit ago, we listened to Zach Kreger talk about his creative process and how thought out it is. But let's hear him talk about him writing Weapons specifically.
Look, I just started writing. You know, I honestly, I didn't have a blueprint. I try not to know where something's gonna go. I wanna just begin and then trust that the movie's going to reveal itself to me as I write. And I wrote for a long time before I was like, okay, I think I have an ending, you know? Because I had the question before I had the answer. I didn't know the kid's plan.
Really?
No, I had no idea. So, you know, but there was that moment where I like had it, where it like came to me and I was like, oh, thank God, you know, I'm going to be able to finish this script.
He's just making it up. And Weapons, in my opinion, is quite nearly a masterpiece, and I promise you, this is not a one-off incident. Here is Zach Cregger talking about him writing his other hit, Barbarian.
And I just, honestly, like, I thought of a double booked Airbnb, and I thought of how scary that would be for a woman. And I was just like, I'm just going to just start writing what happens. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm just going to follow my fingers.
And it isn't just Zach Cregger, it's everyone. It's all your idols, even at the highest level. 2008's Iron Man is one of the greatest, most consequential superhero movies of all time. Its success single-handedly spearheaded the entire MCU, not only back into cultural relevancy after being dogged out by DC for a decade, but created a generation-strong media empire. Iron Man 1 still stands as one of the best movies that Marvel has made, with phenomenal meme-defining performances from Robert Downey Jr. and Jeff Bridges.
In a cave!
And you know how they wrote that movie? Just making crap up. Sometimes on the spot even.
They wrote it as they went along.
This was so amazing. You know, I don't know, $200 million or whatever the thing cost.
Yeah.
You'd think they would have a script.
Right.
You know, you would think.
Yes.
So here we are coming to work, and there would be no script for that scene today.
Right.
And we would sit in there, and I would say, okay, Robert, you play me, and I'll play your guy. So we change parts. Favreau would be calling writer friends of his. He said, here's the scene. Now, you got any ideas?
Now, I would hope that none of you would endure the stress of having to create a multi-million-dollar movie minutes before it's supposed to film, but these giants of the industry really aren't these godlike, giga-brained 4D chess storytellers. They are just dudes on couches and in basements that think things are cool and kind of slap them together. Kishimoto, the author of Naruto, just loved Godzilla and wanted to write about kaijus fighting. He had no idea about the tailed beasts, or the Kaguya clan, or the Senjus when he started writing. He was just slapping together Eastern folklore like the Kyuubi and Jiraiya the Toad Sage and hoping it would work. Adventure Time is one of the most beloved and complex shows in Cartoon Network history. It was just made up from episode to episode, season to season. Pendleton Ward, the show's creator, has openly admitted, there is no end and there is no plan. I get this question at Comic-Con, how far in advance are you plotting everything out? And the answer everyone wants is that, yes, I've plotted out every bit of it, so that people can feel safe, that it's all unfolding in front of me. I feel like when I answer, there is no plan, it bums everyone out. But it shouldn't, because we are those characters, and we are making them live. Stephen King is one of the most famous authors of all time, and he was so blasted out of his mind on drugs and alcohol that he barely remembers writing the entire best-selling novel, Cujo. He wrote, "There's one novel, Cujo, that I barely remember at all. I don't say that with pride or shame, only with a vague sense of sorrow and loss. I like that book. I wish I could remember enjoying the good parts as I put them down on the page." Steven Spielberg, the most famous director of all time, had an experience with Jaws that is probably the most famous example of just doing whatever in a story and it turning out wonderfully. He could not get that stupid shark to work for half of the movie, which meant that a bunch of scenes that were supposed to have a shark ended up having it hidden instead, building the tension until we finally got that amazing reveal. And I think that is the real lesson to take away from all this. You cannot plan to the point where you keep yourself from going through mistakes. Some of the writers that I talk to are so terrified of messing up execution or embarrassing themselves or revealing too much of themselves that they never end up writing anything. But you have to fail in order to succeed. That is the only way you can improve. I promise you, this is what all your idols did. You don't need to put yourself in this spot of writing paralysis because of a desire to plan everything out beforehand and make everything fit. But the answer also isn't just to purely throw everything at the wall willy-nilly either. The key is to find your personal spot of greatest writing between planning and doing. Here is just a little bit more of George R. Martin talking about being an architect versus a gardener.
Well, I have always said that I believe there are two types of writers, which I call the architect and the gardener. I think all writers are a mixture of both. But some lean much more heavily to one side than to the other.
All writers are both. at least all writers who want to have any hope of success.
You know, like Stephen King has that wonderful analogy where he's like, he writes, his process is like, you're a paleontologist and you're unearthing a dinosaur skeleton, one bone at a time, and you don't know what the dinosaur is. You're just following the fossils, and they reveal to you the shape of the story. And oftentimes I've written scripts following like the Save the Cat kind of beat map, and I've outlined before, but with Barbarian, I really didn't do anything like that. I just was an audience member, truly.
These famous world-renowned writers that we idolize aren't accomplished because they thought out every little facet of their work. They are accomplished because they have the freedom and flexibility to stay creative and make errors. And through those errors, they learn their strengths and weaknesses, their limits, and how to dive into the strange and unknown in a controlled way. Because almost without fail, your best ideas come within the writing process itself. But these writers were able to wield that spontaneity and improvisation to merge it into new plans. They set up architecture that flowed with their garden. One of my favorite examples of this is Vince Gilligan, creator of the small show Breaking Bad and even smaller show Better Call Saul. He undoubtedly plans out huge parts of his stories, but he's never limited by those plans. Vince Gilligan's plan was to kill Jesse at the end of Breaking Bad's first season.
You're right, it is true. My original idea was to kill off Jesse at the end of the first season. And
Thank God you didn't.
I know, I could tell that's a very bad idea, right?
Bad one.
Very bad idea. To my credit, I didn't keep that idea very long once we cast Aaron Paul.
And he had to change his entire story of Breaking Bad because he knew what narrative gold he had struck with Jesse and Walter's pairing. So he made a new plan. You know Mike Ehrmantraut, one of the most loved characters in Breaking Bad and a main character in Better Call Saul? He wasn't supposed to exist. This is Mike's first scene in Breaking Bad, and it was supposed to be played out by Saul Goodman saving Jesse. But Saul's actor, Bob Odenkirk, wasn't available that day, so Vince Gilligan just created an entirely new character, Mike, and then he changed his whole story and made a new plan. Vince is a living testament that you have to be flexible as a writer. You have to be flexible and adventurous and sometimes say F it when you feel passionate about the story changing. But he also showcases that whatever change you bring should inspire a new plan to best utilize that passion. I think my favorite Vince Gilligan moment is how he took these throwaway lines and turned them into absolute gold.
Oh, no, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he's the one. Siempre, soy amigo del cartel. Shut up. I just speak English. Lalo didn't send you? No, Lalo?
This was in 2009. Saul calls out about Ignacio and he calls out about Lalo. This single line of names that never gets brought up again in Breaking Bad is the basis for the creation of two of the most famous characters in modern TV history nearly a decade later, Ignacio Varga and Lalo Salamanca. This is the power of just winging it. This is the power of having the confidence in yourself as a writer to take hold of your imagination, even at the risk of making something that might come out not exactly as you want. You haven't seen all the garbage your idols have made in order to get to their high spot. I've written 6 full fantasy books, one of them being 1,000 pages, but my first book was hot garbage. But I'm happy I wrote it because I learned so much doing it. Don't allow yourself to get stuck seeking perfection to the point where you do nothing. You deserve more than that, and so do your stories. Anyway, thanks for watching all the way until the end. Like and subscribe, and please check out my books on my website and my editing services that I offer. I'll put links in the description below. Also check out my second and third channel where I talk about different stories and TV shows and video games, and my third channel for the lore of my books. As always, it was a pleasure. I will talk to you all again soon.